Derek's life had once been filled with laughter and the simple joys of creating art. He hailed from Asheville, a small town tucked away in the rolling hills of North Carolina. As a child, he would often get lost in sketching the Blue Ridge Mountains, finding solace in the peace they offered. But when tragedy struck, the sudden death of his young wife in a car accident, Derek's world came crashing down. The scenic beauty that once inspired him now only reminded him of what he had lost. To make matters worse, Derek's creative spark had dulled. The canvases lay untouched, and the paintbrushes dried out. The weight of grief bore heavily on him. To try and recapture the old zest for life, and primarily to break free from the shadows of his past, he decided to relocate to New York City. The city's vibrancy and ever-evolving skyline promised a fresh start and perhaps a new muse. Months after his move, Derek still felt adrift. His art still remained elusive, a distant memory of brighter days. On the recommendation of a fellow artist, Derek decided to book a luxurious penthouse suite via Airbnb. The suite, perched high above Manhattan, offered a panoramic view of the city's iconic skyline. It was said that many artists had stayed there, drawing inspiration from its lofty heights. The first day in the penthouse felt like a dream. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights and possibilities. Derek felt a stirring in his soul, something he hadn't felt in a long while. The suite seemed to be working its magic. However, as night descended, so did a shroud of unease. Derek's phone rang, the sharp trill breaking the silence of the night. He answered, expecting maybe a call from the building's concierge or a wrong number. "Is she with you?" A gruff, intoxicated voice sneered on the other end. Confused, Derek replied, "Who? I think you got the wrong number. Don't play games with me. I know she moved on and you're with her now." The voice grew angrier and more desperate. Unsettled, Derek hung up, attributing the call to some drunk, misty-old person. He settled into bed, hoping for a good night's sleep. But the calls continued. Night after night, Derek's phone would ring at odd hours. The voice would alternate between pleading and threatening, always demanding to know about her. Derek's paranoia grew. One night, fueled by terror and exhaustion, Derek decided to confront the caller. "Who are you? Why are you tormenting me?" The caller laughed, a cold and hollow sound. "She was mine, and now she's with you. In that penthouse. You think you can take her from me?" Derek's heart raced. Could this person be the angry ex of the previous renter? But why target him? He had no ties, no relations to anyone from the city. Derek tried to reason with him. "I don't know who you're talking about. I'm just here on my own, looking for some inspiration." But the voice cut him off. "I've seen you with her. Enjoy your time while it lasts, because soon it'll be over." With that chilling promise, the calls became more sinister. He contemplated leaving the penthouse, but a stubborn determination held him back. This was his sanctuary, the only place that brought him close to this art after his wife's demise. He wouldn't let this twisted individual drag him away. One evening, as Derek was trying to drown out the fear with some wine, there was a loud bang on his door. Panic surged through him. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, Derek saw a disheveled man, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The man was murmuring something, pressing his ear to the door as if trying to catch sounds from within. Derek dialed 911 immediately, relaying his situation. But as he spoke, the pounding on the door intensified. The intruder was screaming now, "Give her back! Give her back to me!" The minutes felt like hours, but soon the wailing of sirens grew louder. Derek could hear shouting and a brief scuffle outside. Then silence. The police had apprehended the man. He was indeed the vengeful ex of the penthouse's previous tenant. In his delusional state, fueled by alcohol and bitterness, he had mistaken Derek for his ex's new lover. The shock of the events took a toll on Derek. He moved out of the penthouse the next day. However, New York had one final twist in store for him. As he was packing, he found an old, faded photograph tucked behind a drawer. It was the picture of a woman, strikingly beautiful. She seemed familiar, yet Derek couldn't place her. On showing it to the building concierge while leaving, the man's face paled. That's the previous tenant. She went missing a few months ago." Derek's heart sank. The implications were horrifying. The deranged ex hadn't been entirely wrong. Haunted by this revelation, Derek left the city, his quest for inspiration replaced by a desperate need for peace. But some questions remained forever unanswered. Where had she been? I was never one to believe in the unexplainable, the unknown. My name is Ben, an archaeologist by profession and a man of hard facts by nature. Most of my life was spent unearthing historical relics, uncovering truths buried beneath centuries of dust and myth. I had a wife, Marie, and a daughter, Sarah, whom I cherished deeply. I'd often take them on my trips, making them privy to the wonders of our world. But as the years passed, Marie grew tired of the constant relocations. We parted ways, and Sarah, now in her 20s, began a life of her own in New York. The estrangement left me with a vacuum, which I tried to fill with more work. In the summer of 2023, I decided to take a break and explore the United Kingdom, a land I had long been enamored with, but never got the chance to explore leisurely. I booked a sprawling estate in the Yorkshire countryside on Airbnb, a historic 18th century mansion with an illustrious past and untold stories in its walls. The picture showed sprawling lawns, age-old trees, and the manor itself, regal with its red-bricked exterior and tall chimneys. Upon arrival, I was welcomed by my host, Robert, a man of sharp features and even sharper glances. He was cautious, taking care to give explicit instructions about certain rooms that were off-limits. We shared a cup of tea, during which Robert spoke less of himself and more about the house's history. But as the night approached, he grew visibly anxious. "Ben," he hesitated, "you might hear noises, especially at night. The house is old, and its timbers often creak." I chuckled, dismissing his concern. "Don't worry, Robert. I've camped amidst ruins. No house can spook me." That first night, as I lay in the grand master bedroom, I heard them, faint thuds, occasionally accompanied by what sounded like soft, pained moans. Attributing them to the creaking timbers, I shrugged it off and fell into a deep sleep. The following day was bright and sunny, the house's majestic beauty distracting me from the previous night's occurrences. However, as evening approached, the feeling of unease returned. This time, the sounds were louder and more frequent. It seemed to emanate from the floor above, particularly the attic. Curiosity got the better of me, but remembering Robert's warnings, I resisted the urge to explore. By the third night, my logical mind was battling an overwhelming sense of paranoia. I decided to confront Robert. "Is there someone else living here?" I inquired the next morning. Robert hesitated, a sheen of sweat forming on his brow. "No, just us." "Why?" I detailed the noises. He looked uneasy, but stuck to his explanation of the house's aging structure. I wanted to believe him, but a nagging doubt persisted. That evening, my suspicions grew. An unmistakable scent of freshly cooked food wafted through the halls. I followed it, finding the source in the kitchen, a freshly prepared meal for one. And above me, more sounds, now more like shuffling footsteps. The following day, after Robert had gone out, I decided to investigate. Pushing aside my reservations, I ascended to the attic. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step amplifying my dread. The attic door was old, its wood swollen from years of neglect. As I pushed it open, the room revealed itself, dimly lit by the afternoon sun filtering through a cracked window. It was filled with antiques, relics of a bygone era, but in a corner, there lay a makeshift bed and empty food cans. Pictures of the estate, of Robert, and even a few candid ones of me since my arrival. Panicking, I rushed downstairs, searching for a phone or a way to contact the authorities. I found neither. Evening approached, and with it came Robert, who noticed my anxiety. "What happened, Ben?" I detailed my discovery, and we decided to confront the intruder that night. Hours felt like minutes, and soon, nightfall blanketed the manor. The attic noises resumed. Robert and I, armed with makeshift weapons, made our way up, trying to be as silent as our racing heartbeats would allow. We reached the attic to find a man, ragged, with wild hair and eyes that bore into ours with a chilling intensity. Seeing us, he didn't run or shout. Instead, he began to laugh, a low, haunting sound that echoed through the attic. "Did you think," he began, voice raspy, that no one would notice this house's treasures. This was the perfect hideout. His desperation made him unpredictable. Robert lunged at him, but the man was quick, pulling a knife from his rags and slashing. Blood splattered, and Robert fell, wounded but alive. In the ensuing chaos, I managed to disarm the intruder, restraining him until the police arrived, alerted by a neighbor. Robert sent him a message before. The aftermath was a whirlwind of statements, medical attention, and gratitude. Robert and I shared an unspoken bond, forever connected by that terrifying experience. As for the intruder, he was a homeless man, seeking shelter and perhaps some valuables to sell, driven to the edge by life's cruelties. The estate, with all its beauty and charm, bore scars of that night. I left soon after, shaken but alive. Some truths, as I'd learned, were better left buried. Emily Hamilton had always been an introvert. Growing up as the youngest of 3 children in a rambunctious family, she had found solace in the world of books. Her words were her friends, her sentences were her comfort, and her stories were her escape. As she grew older, her passion for storytelling had naturally evolved into a career as a writer. The noise and demands of her bustling family life, however, often interrupted her creative flow. Her present life was stable, albeit unremarkable. Divorced with no children and only the echoes of her large family to keep her company, Emily decided to break away from her usual suburban environment. She needed a retreat, a place where she could truly let her creativity shine, free from distractions and interruptions. That was how Emily found herself in a charming townhouse in the city center, rented through Airbnb. It was quaint and old, with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings. The walls were decorated with old portraits of strangers from another era, eyes following her as she moved. The listing mentioned it was historically preserved, which explained the old-world charm and vintage furnishings. But for Emily, it was perfect. On her first day, Emily was in the living area, mapping out her novel structure when a thud came from the other side of the wall. It was faint but noticeable. The noise repeated again, louder. She tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she had a noisy neighbor. By evening, as she settled into bed, a series of unsettling noises began. There were scrapes, thumps, and what sounded like slurred, angry muttering. Emily tried to block out the sounds, imagining a drunk neighbor returning home. She wrapped herself tighter in the blanket, desperately trying to ignore the fear creeping into her mind. In the morning, she decided to introduce herself to the neighbor. It might be an opportunity to discuss the noise, she thought. But as she knocked on the door adjacent to hers, no one answered. She tried again later, but still, there was no response. The next night, the disturbances resumed. It sounded like someone pacing back and forth, accompanied by a low, rhythmic chanting. Emily's pulse quickened. She peeked through her window, trying to see if there was any movement in the house next door, but it was pitch dark. On the third day, curiosity and fear got the best of her. She decided to confront the source of her paranoia. Emily knocked firmly on the neighbor's door. When there was no answer, she slowly turned the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked, but to her surprise, it creaked open. The interior was chillingly cold. The air was thick with an old, musky smell. Dim light filtered through the dusty windows, revealing a living area much like her own, but in complete disarray. Empty liquor bottles littered the floor, and papers with indecipherable scribbles were strewn all around. A faint groan came from upstairs, followed by dragging footsteps. Emily hesitated for a moment, then decided to ascend the staircase, the wooden steps groaning in protest under her weight. She reached the top of the stairs, and the noises became clearer. The muttering was now a loud, desperate whimper. It was coming from behind a half-open door at the end of the hallway. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. Inside was a disheveled man, presumably the neighbor. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth, and he was repeatedly striking his own head, muttering words that Emily couldn't quite catch. Seeing him, Emily's heart raced. She had expected to confront a noisy drunk, but was met with a scene of genuine distress. "Hey," she began cautiously, "are you okay?" The man stopped abruptly, turning his attention to her. His gaze was vacant and haunted. that won't stop. He whispered hoarsely. The voices, they keep telling me things. Terrible things. Emily's fear shifted to concern. This man was clearly struggling with some form of mental health crisis. She tried to approach him, but he backed away, shaking his head vigorously. No, you shouldn't be here, he warned, his voice shaky. They'll start talking to you too. Panicking, Emily retreated, running downstairs and out of the townhouse, her mind racing. She needed to help this man, but she didn't know how. After contacting the local authorities, Emily learned the truth. The man was Arthur, the actual owner of both townhouses. His family had a history of schizophrenia, and it seemed Arthur had been living in isolation, battling his own demons without any support. She also learned the more shocking revelation. The townhouse she was staying in was not legally listed on Airbnb. Arthur, in his confused state, had put it up, and she was the unfortunate guest who had come to stay. Emily returned home, her retreat cut short. The echoes of Arthur's haunted eyes and desperate pleas stayed with her, making it impossible to remain in the townhouse. She wrote about her experience, creating a chilling narrative that shed light on the terrifying reality of mental illness. The story became her bestseller, but every time Emily read from it at an event or discussed it in an interview, she could still hear those eerie noises from next door, reminding her of the thin line that separates sanity from the abyss.